There were a few things that I thought probably should have been added to the end of that last video on leaving the church, but it was enough that I also kind of decided it needed its own video. And namely, that's the idea of accepting paradoxes, because in a lot of ways, I think that's actually the central tenet of all of Omnism, is the ability to do that. I remember very early on when I was sort of, I won't say so much making my transition, but studying Eastern mysticism and getting very much into that. And one of my favorite philosophers was Alan Watts, who did an incredible amount to sort of bring Zen Buddhism over into the Western mindset and explain it to people in such extreme minutia that it was almost sort of insane and sort of made it Western, but nevertheless it was really, really interesting. Zen Buddhism is really Charn, or Chinese Charn Buddhism, which was brought over there by a Charn monk. And I always had a great fascination with Taoism, and so Zen really did well for me because Zen and Taoism are very, very similar. And of course, I loved what Alan Watts had to say about it. But occasionally, Mr. Watts would get on these huge rants about Christianity and how horrible it was, and he was constantly comparing the way the Christian mindset worked to the way that the Buddhist mindset worked. And what he was really doing was comparing Eastern to Western. And something that really annoyed me about that was I thought, why do you need to describe your belief system in contrast to another? I notice Christians doing this a lot, particularly Protestants will often describe themselves and how they're different from Catholics. And individual denominations, especially ever since the revivals of the 1800s, have sort of described what they believed by how they were different from other denominations. They weren't talking about Christ necessarily, or God, or the love of God, or being like Christ, being in the persona of Christ and the likeness of Christ. It was more about how are we different from other churches. And that really got me thinking about how important it was that, at least for myself, when I went over to other mindsets, when I started exploring other philosophies, that if I did what, to me, Alan Watts did, which was just to sort of jump over to another philosophy, say, okay, I'm a Western thinker, but boom, I'm going to be an Eastern thinker with a Western mindset, then all I was essentially doing was just jumping belief systems, just switching one for another, and then, of course, having a lot of nasty things to say about my previous mindset. And for me, of course, omnism wasn't a term for me at the time, but for me, what was very important to my belief system was the ability to accept the paradox, was the ability to say, okay, I still believe what I used to believe, but I also believe this as well. Because to me, that was what caused evolution. It wasn't just shifting to another mindset, because to me, when you just shift to another mindset, you simply shift to another value system. You essentially remain yourself, your same personality, your same way of doing things, except you've shifted over to another way of thinking. And that's great. If someone finds another way of thinking, that's fantastic. And I'm all for people finding other philosophies and other belief systems which work better for them. But to me, the whole point of what I believed and omnism itself was that you didn't just do that. You did explore all of these other belief systems, but you somehow managed to accept the paradox. You somehow managed to say, okay, this belief system I used to believe in is true, but this belief system is also true, and so is this one, and so is this one. Because of, to me, what that does to your mind. Because when you accept those paradoxes, omnism really becomes about climbing mountains. It's always about climbing mountains and trying to look down over things and see where the paradoxes cease to be paradoxes. It's a lot like in science, where on the one hand, it's accepted that relativity is true. Why? Because relativity does seem to fit the evidence. And there are experiments that we can do which seem to fit relativity, and it appears to be a true way of looking at reality. On the other hand, quantum physics seems to be true as well, and science at large accepts both of those theories as essentially being true and being true ways of seeing the universe, even though they don't correlate. They don't quite agree. And so part of science is always trying to rise above that, and that's where I see people like Brian Greene, Edgar Wheaton, the string theorists, and people of that ilk, who are all trying to correlate those two, trying to find a place beyond the paradox, because they know somehow that relativity and quantum physics must both be true. They both do seem to describe reality, so how do you correlate them? And to me, that is the job of the Omnist. We are, all of us, trying to figure out where those paradoxes level out. Yes, Jesus Christ said, I'm the only way. Muhammad said, I'm the only way. Buddha said, this is the way. Krishna says, I am an avatar of Vishnu. And yet somehow they must all be true. And in accepting that paradox, we slowly do find the evidence. But more importantly, we force our minds into a place where we have to evolve. We have to rise above those things. We have to be able to hold two completely opposing ideas, or maybe 40 completely opposing ideas in our mind, and try to rise above them. Ultimately, to me, that's Omnism. Again, I'm the Urban Omnist, still trying to climb the mountain. And remember, guys, none of this works without you. So, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and above all, don't forget to send me those questions.